Hey, folks, welcome back to the Peaceful Way podcast, where we are exploring the mechanisms, concepts, and ideas behind having a more peaceful and less violent society. I'm here with Ollie from the Liberty Quill. How's it going, man?
Good, Jordan. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. So, Ollie, what are you? Who are you, and what is the Liberty Quill?
Well, my name's Ollie Adamson, Oliver Adamson, but most people call me Ollie. My friends call me Ollie. Uh, who am I? That's a great question. I guess I'm 43 years old, so it's hard to start, but I'll keep it brief. I guess I would start with no king but Christ. So that's the foundation of who I am, and everything streams from there. I'm married. I've been married for 10 years. I've got 3 kids, a 9, a 7, and a 5-year-old. They're homeschooled. The Liberty Quill is something that I thought about for about a year between maybe 2018 and 2019, as I first got into the Liberty movement as a fresh libertarian at the time. And it took me about a year to finally say, okay, I'm going to start to put pen to paper and get some of these new ideas that I'm coming across, and maybe put a spin on them, or it might have just been an act of therapy for all I know, just a way to get some ideas down. I don't. I live in a rural part of Canada on the East Coast, and being a Christian, most of my Christian community would identify as conservative. So a lot of these political views that I hold are viewed as quite contrarian. So I guess, outside of meeting people on social media, there's not much dialogue that happens. My wife is kind of interested in it and supports me, and trusts that if I'm introducing new ideas into the family, that I've given them quite a bit of thought, and I've made sure scripturally that they're consistent. So yeah, the Liberty Quill is a site that I put up that initially was for me to write some essays. And actually the original tagline for the site was "Unfurling Libertarian Thought in Canada, One Quill at a Time." And originally I wanted to, specifically to the Canadian audience, try and introduce these ideas, because I think you and I both recognize that the idea of freedom, personal liberty, personal responsibility, small government is quite foreign to most Canadians. So I felt like, well, maybe this can reach some people. The Liberty Quill today is a little different. At the turn of 2021, I decided to change the tagline and to actually change its mission, I guess, if you want to call it that. So I just dropped in Canada. So it's just a place to unfurl libertarian thought. It says one quill at a time. Quill obviously acts as a kind of double entendre. And every time I write an article or I post something, I call it a quill. But what it is today is it's really a platform, and I invite anybody wishing to share. Anyone who's got a poem, maybe they did a graphic piece of art, or they want to submit an essay. Anybody who values liberty and values expressing that, and the good that can come from that, and the encouragement that comes out of that. Basically, I don't view the Liberty Quill as my personal blog anymore. I view it as, sure, I'm an administrator. Sure, I cough up the money to make sure we can continue to host articles there. But if anything, I would say maybe I'm the lead contributor, in the sense that, I have to make sure to keep putting stuff out. Otherwise, it's going to go stagnant. But it really belongs to anybody who would like to submit an article or a piece of art. I do reserve the right to make sure that's in line with some of my core values. Like I won't post, explicit material. But that's definitely a discussion I can have with people if they're ever interested. So yeah, so that's what the Liberty Quill is. Today it's designed for anybody who needs to put something somewhere. And I understand there's sites that are already doing that. I know you use like medium.com and things like that. Yeah, it's just an actual URL, a site that I pay for, and I can host things. So that's the Liberty Quill, and that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah. Go check out the Liberty Quill. It's an awesome little website, especially for the Canadian context. I've also written a couple pieces for the Liberty Quill as well. Ollie's been kind enough to post some of my stuff. I wanted to just before we get into it, I also wanted to say it's funny. Ollie and I actually met. It's got to be over a decade ago now.
Oh, it'd be probably 14 years ago, 13, 14 years ago.
Yeah. We met, and he hired me at a homeless shelter in Calgary, and he did my initial interview. And then I think we only worked together maybe for a year or something before you moved away. But it's just funny. And then you reached out to me like a few months ago, and you and I kind of have like a lot of similar ideas and feelings about, the state and violence and faith and all that kind of stuff too. So we kind of just ran into each other, I don't know, online, and then we reconnected all this time later. So it's just kind of funny how, perhaps God sets up these appointments, Yeah,
well, I remember when we reconnected, you said, "Oh, that's crazy," because I didn't know while I was at the Seed. I didn't know that there was another. I don't know what you would have said, libertarian.
Yeah.
I forget which label you used, but you said that there was another one there, and I didn't mention it at the time, but I laughed internally because I'm thinking you wouldn't have known because I wasn't at the time, right? I was just like, still straight up in that conservative period of my life. So I was probably much more of a progressive at that time. I'm sure like all the college age people you hired were progressives, I would imagine. Well, there was that. I don't know if you actually lived there, but there was that whole. There was a house where everybody was living. Like there was bunch of
the Boness house.
Community? The what?
It was that house in Boness.
And there was like 8. There was like 6 or 8 people in there, and they were doing like kind of they probably, their backs would probably go up. I'm not meaning to mock at all. Like it was almost like that commune type lifestyle, like the early church model of we'll share everything and we. So yeah, you didn't live there though, did you?
No, I didn't. I met all those people at the shelter that we worked at. So that, and I'm friends with some of them too. Like they're really cool people.
They were. I was involved in interviews with a lot of them, and it's interesting. I know this doesn't. Well, no, this does kind of lead into charity, and the thing is it's funny because, and this is the. I might be getting ahead of myself here, but I'll forget if I don't bring it up now. Sure. So you've got kind of the government approach of dealing with problems, right? And that's usually credentials. Oh, we need credentials and we need data and we need to throw millions of dollars at the problem, right? And even so, it's funny because I would hold these interviews, and I was grateful that upper management allowed me as a middle manager to, bring on what I felt was the best people to be compassionate, right? And to help the guests of the shelter. Like, I don't know how many times I sat in front of like a young person like you, and I could just sense from the energy, from the way that the answers were coming out, like some people showed me their heart and were compassionate and showed a desire to be there to try and help these individuals with no experience. Like literally, I have never done this. I have faith that I can step into this role. I don't know. But in subsequent questions, I could see that they had the heart to do the work. fast forward, I could be interviewing somebody who had, worked as an ADAC counselor. I don't know if ADAC still exists out there. No knock on ADAC. There's plenty of good people there, right? And not to digress, but I've had struggles in my own life, and people from ADAC, helped me at different times. But the point is they could have the greatest resume, and yet as I'm interviewing them, I'm like, this is just a job.
Yeah.
Like you're going to treat, and I mean, it's a job for everybody. I mean, otherwise they would be volunteering, not trying to come on staff. But it was really interesting to see, like, you've got people with the qualifications and the education, but I'm just not sensing that they actually care.
Yeah.
And so I would always go with that individual that was just dying to help. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, I know that was a little bit of a rabbit trail there, but
that's kind of the way to do it, man. Like, like you said, credentialism is overrated. You kind of have to, oftentimes temperament, attitude is like way more of what you're looking for,
Yeah. Like, I don't want to know your credentials. I want to know, like, what truth you think you hold, right? Like, I'm not interested in the credentials.
Yeah.
There are times for credentials where it can add some weight, but I mean, the higher you go up with your credentials, the more levers are operating, right? And now you've got pressures coming from all over the place. So anyways,
yeah. I mean, for a brain surgeon, I'd like them to be credentialed, but for a lot, like, honestly, the vast majority of jobs, credentials are a little overrated. And I think that's just the world we're actually moving into, where a lot of these legacy institutions and their credentialing is it's all in a bubble, and that bubble is going to burst at some point here. So anyways, I wanted to have you on the show today, actually, to talk about something a little more specific. You wrote a piece called Capsized by Charity at the Liberty Quill. And I just wanted to discuss it with you. And you had some pretty interesting thoughts about charity and like what it actually means, and maybe some misconceptions about what charity is. But do you just want to give us a bit of a synopsis about the piece you wrote, and then we'll just get into it from there?
Sure. Yeah. So that piece, and I don't know if this is unique to me or if anybody who's ever attempted writing has experienced this, but I feel that work is both too long and too short at the same time. And I think what I mean by that is it could have potentially been 3 separate articles or dives into aspects of charity. But I chose to do kind of 3 points, or to develop, I guess, a thesis around how charity benefits both parties. So the one being charitable and the one receiving charity. So there's that aspect. There's the aspect of the biblical call to charity, and how, and this isn't, I kind of mentioned this in the article, although because I'm a Christian, I stick to that whenever I share about kind of religious matters. I'm going to stick to what I know best. I'm not going to speak for other faiths, but I know that charitable acts are also highly valued in throughout other faiths. So there's that element. There's the biblical call to charity and what that looks like and what that entails. There's the benefits of charity, not only for both the person giving, but the person receiving, and how that actually affects and can create more cohesive communities, which can advance peace in the world. And then the last one was how, when we choose to be charitable with one another and not rely on the state to do that, how that can actually reduce the legitimacy of the state and can help us, those of us that want to see the size of the government reduced, how it can actually slowly move it towards, like, if our communities are stronger and we're relying on one another, and this comes out in the article, but a lot of people, if they're the type to vote, and for them voting is important, and won't get into that, but then maybe some of the policies they're looking at is not always, well, is my social assistance check going to go up or down regardless of all your other policies that I find abhorrent? I just want the carrot in front of my face, right? So it's kind of those three elements are what I tried to flesh out a little bit. So that's kind of what I went with.
Yeah. Do you have like a working definition of charity? Like, when you say charity, what do you mean by charity? Because that could be a place of contention for some people. And I'll just give an example, like, especially from the progressive side of the political spectrum, I hear like, putting in a government that institutes a massive welfare state is that's just being compassionate. It's called being a compassionate society, right? And it's just like a priori that's what it means. And then they sort of they'll kind of camp on the moral high ground of that and say this is the definition of compassion. And that's where I'd be like, well, I don't know that that's really compassion when you have to use a massively coercive and violent state to institute your utopian goals. But do you have like, what are you talking about when you're talking about the word charity?
Yeah, so just, I guess, really fundamentally or basic, I guess I'd say to be charitable is to be kind, to be forgiving, to be generous, helping those in need. So it's an outflowing of a voluntary decision to help somebody. And so to give of my money or to give of my time or to serve soup at a soup kitchen is an aspect of being charitable. But to me, it does not define charity. Charity goes so far beyond that. And like you just spoke to it, the problem with being comfortable and riding on, the good feelings of altruism when you have nothing to do with it but money coming off your paycheck or money getting added to every goods and service you purchase, and then having somebody redirect that to help people. I just don't see that as for me personally, I don't ascribe that to to being charitable as I understand it. And I also think that individuals that only go that far and say, well, technically I'm part of a system that helps others, so I'm charitable. I don't think they're actually experiencing the benefits of sacrificing willingly to elevate somebody else. I think there's something profound in that, and people that don't ever do it are missing out.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I think that it does seem like charity, it's larger than just, like you said, serving at a soup kitchen. It's more of a spirit or an attitude that you kind of have to embody, like, even if you're talking to someone, you can converse in a more charitable way, right? Let's say someone is presenting to you maybe a crazy idea like the earth is flat or something, right? Like, how's the most charitable way I can talk to that person without just like trying to be confrontational and be like, oh, you're a crazy person, I shouldn't listen to anything you have to say. Like, well, no, we could actually like speak to them in a more charitable way. Now on Twitter we don't do that, we just are completely vicious and mean and nasty, but otherwise in person, no, I'm kidding, we should always be charitable everywhere. But do you think that, like, would you agree with that assessment? It's like not simply just money or time. It really is like a disposition that you got to hold.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think of the concept of mercy. Mercy
Right.
is charitable, right? Because we live in a world and we seem to be hardwired that we want vengeance, we want justice, right?
Right.
And you have actually, you put out a tweet a long time ago about something like you want justice, but you get war. I don't know. It was something like, it's true. We all walk around wanting justice,
Yeah.
and we don't get like that doesn't bring about peace.
Yeah.
That's an eye for an eye, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that, you know, I don't want that to get out of hand. And I mean, I have kids. I mean, if somebody hurts my child, like I want justice, but I also want, that the person that made the mistake or committed a crime, or I want to see them rehabilitated. Um, if we can avoid it, I don't want to see their lives ruined, because then they just live in desperation, and they just swing from one offense to the next. That doesn't solve anything. So, I mean, mercy is the big one. We see in what is it? I think John chapter 8, Gospel of John, where there's all the Pharisees, right, and the woman caught in adultery, and like what a perfect example of charity. Like, so they know the law. She's caught in adultery. Now they're already hypocrites, because whatever man was caught in adultery is nowhere to be seen. No, they're going to make an example of this woman. So they've got her, and they're going to stone her. And they catch Jesus, and they say, you know the law. What should be done with this woman? Jesus knows the law. And, it would probably be a lot easier for Jesus to go, well, I'm just going to follow the law, because that's justice. And this has already been established. So I wipe my hands clean of this. No, right? He draws a line in the sand, and he says, whichever, whoever of you is without sin, go ahead, throw the first stone. They all drop their stones and they leave. And then he turns to her and he says, sin no more. Go.
Totally.
Like, that's charitable. That's showing mercy. She didn't deserve that, right? She, by the law's standard, she deserved to be punished.
Right.
But he showed mercy. So that's an example. Like, to me, charity goes, you said it perfectly. It's a disposition. It's I'm going to share this example. I'm going to show you my hand for sure, because you'd think it's such an abstract example. It must be about you. It's a Saturday afternoon. I can, I got 2 little girls. I can work on an article, or they can call me down to the craft table and say, oh, we got all kinds of glitter and paint, and they're going to destroy the whole homeschool room, and the craft table is going to be a mess. First of all, I actually have anxiety around glitter. I don't know what it is, but everybody that knows me laughs. So being charitable is laying what I want to do down and saying, I'm going to tie strings with my girls this afternoon, and I'm going to invest in them. That's being charitable. So yeah, without beating it down too much, I would say it goes far beyond cutting a check, which is good, serving soup, which is good. It's actually about investing in others and treating others the way you want to be treated.
Yeah, totally. That's I totally agree with that. I kind of wonder, like, how do I want to put this? Okay. Like you were saying, about the desire for justice in our society. I totally agree with you that it's like, it's almost anti-charity. And I think, okay, we as like Christians, we actually sort of have this whole system worked out. Now, whether you believe this or not, to the listener, it's like, it's neither here nor there, but we kind of have this whole system worked out where we sort of believe, well, God says justice is mine, and he'll render the final judgment and he'll bring justice, a perfect justice eventually. And so we as like Christians, it's kind of not really our concern necessarily if justice is carried out. Now, I know this kind of goes, even modern Christianity, there's a very social justice strain that goes through us, where we really feel like we should be the arbiters and executors of justice. But I think there's that's a kind of a two-sided sword that can be really brutal. And I did have an episode I released a few months ago called All Justice, No Peace. And there's kind of riffing off of that. There's a slogan, especially with like the Black Lives Matter movement of no justice, no peace, right? And my sort of take on it was, when just everything is about justice, there's never going to be peace, because for one thing, justice will never perfectly be carried out. It cannot be. There's never going to be like a sentence that's handed down or a outcome that is achieved where everybody agrees, oh, this was the perfectly just outcome. There's going to be a person or a group of people who feel like they got shafted from that outcome, right? There's just like no avoiding that. So this idea of like pursuing justice, I think it's something I got to read more about, but I'm sort of skeptical of it. Like I'm almost like, is that really even what we should be focused on? Because it's such an elusive thing and no one agrees on what justice is. And it actually makes us like super angry. It turns the world into heroes and villains, into this like black and white dichotomy where you're sort of chasing boogeymen and stuff like this. And like, even I do it. I have like a very with state actors, let's say politicians and whatnot, I can feel very resentful about them sometimes, and I'm like, man, they need to sit in a jail cell for the stuff that they're doing. And maybe, but at the end of the day, I've decided, you know what, whether they get punished or get what they deserve is sort of like irrelevant. I just want their boots off my neck. But as long as they lift their boots off my neck, I don't need like justice to be carried out necessarily. Do you kind of feel that way, or is that just like me? Because I'm kind of like, man, I don't know, this whole justice thing, it has a real dark side to it, and it can, like Lenin felt like he was achieving justice for the proletariat, and in doing so, he murdered a lot of people. Hitler felt like he was getting justice for the Treaty of Versailles, which was very brutal to the Germans after World War One. And so like this whole like pursuit of justice can have very dark and nasty outcomes. But I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think of, one while you were talking, I was thinking, we can't undo the wrongs of the past. Like you can't, it's not like tipping the scales where like I'm thinking reparations or something.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
Wow, we were so bad. We were so bad to your grandparents and your great grandparents for so long that we're going to, bless you now and do this and do that. That doesn't erase the wrongs that happened to those people. You can't throw money at it. You can't kneel and bow before groups of people that weren't the generation that was wrong. And I understand, like, it's not that I sit there and laugh and, well, no, okay, sometimes I do laugh, but I understand the desire to make it right. But there is, and you've already touched on it, I feel like the state and these movements think you reach peace through appeasement, and you don't.
Yeah.
And all you do is you shift the problem, right? And did you see the headline about the $500 checks for the next year and a half to Oakland families of color?
I think I did hear about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So Again, I understand. Like, I'm sure there's statistics. I'm sure the demographics would
Yeah.
say. I think I read that in Oakland, the average white family is making 3 times more than the average black family.
Right.
So clearly, there's a divide there, right?
Yeah.
But you're not dealing with the average white family and the average black family.
Right.
You're addressing poor families in general, and they've guised it under the header of private funding. I have no idea what that means.
Oh,
But
weird.
I don't know if that's some big philanthropist that has come forward, because that's a lot of money for 18 months in a row, $500 per family.
Yeah. So,
But
sorry, was that, is it a government initiative or is it a private?
Well, the mayor of Oakland announced it. So
Okay.
it's being kind of vocalized by local government, but they're saying it's privately funded.
Okay.
But the thing is like, you just see it right there. It's like, I understand that on the one hand, we're gonna help these people because they need assistance, but the minute you exclude poor white families, like, you're creating another problem.
Yeah.
And that's not going to bring about peace.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So,
It's just resentment politics, right? Yeah, it's identity politics in general. That's what it is. But just playing on people's resentments and I mean, I don't know. It's one of those things where, like, I don't really have a problem with it if it's just a private individual and they feel particularly they want to help this one group of people. All right. Again, my big thing is, like, no violence, no use of force. But I don't know, when you're partnering with a local government and then the government is advertising this, then because all the government is like everyone competing for their piece of the limited pie, right? So that's a dynamic where you're actually going to make people more angry and more upset, and that whole, like, ethos of being charitable and being compassionate and loving your neighbor and all that kind of stuff is just, like, completely thrown out the window, because now it's seen as a competition for scarce resources, as opposed to, like, somebody is just out of the generosity of their own heart, they're giving to somebody.
and that's a classic example of, I'm happy for every individual black family that's going to receive that, privately funded, generous $500 a month to help them. But I mean, I have to play the tape through, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, what does that actually look like? And, well, first of all, we're constantly bombarded with, this desire to end systematic racism. Okay, well, the optics of that program,
it's
maybe
bad.
racism isn't the word, but it's definitely discrimination, right? Right there, it's kind of like, okay, wow. But beyond that, I'm living in an apartment complex, and I'm one of the few white families, or whatever. It doesn't even matter if I'm one of the few ones. Take 2 neighbors. They're both considered poor, lower income families. 2 neighbors. We're coexisting. We're doing our best. We've got some cultural differences. And for the next 18 months, I'm looking over at your unit, and I'm knowing that you've got an extra 500 flowing in, and it's because of the color of your skin. Now, that can present problems, and that's some of the things that's some of the things I address in the article, is like that whole being charitable. When neighbors are charitable with one another, like, it builds stronger communities. It betters sometimes your mental health. You're there for one another. But this is, not to digress, but you play the tape through, and it's like, that's going to have you're going to create other problems as a result of this, right? So that's an issue.
Yeah. And I think, like, even coming from both our perspective and kind of our critique of the state in general is that the state is always, I think most people could agree with this sort of definition. It is the monopoly on the use of force, and it is redistributing resources, whether you think that's justified or not. That's what it is doing, and it's sort of unlike an economy, which is not a fixed pie. Sort of the political economy is a fixed pie.
Right.
There's always only a limited amount of resources that can be distributed.
They have they have revenues.
Yeah. And so, and so and this is the problem, is that you turn what people don't really think about in terms of like a government welfare state is that there is this political economy going on, and what they're trying to do is buy people's votes, and they're trying to buy favor with certain political action groups and lobby groups, and there's nothing like this. Is actually some of the most, all the complaints of like capitalism and like unfair competition and corporatism, like a lot of what goes on in the welfare state. And I speak as somebody who has worked most of my career in this industry of sort of social services and stuff. What actually goes on in the welfare state is a very vicious form of capitalism, a very almost predatory form of capitalism, where it's basically just trying to buy people off. And there's no sense of community or social trust. And it pits groups of people against one another. And I think this really, and actually I'm writing one of my next episodes in the future. I want to talk about trust and how trust is like a commodity that is very important. It's like a social commodity that's very important in a society, in that if you don't have high levels of trust, you actually there's a lot of violence in those societies, a lot of crime. And the more trust is eroded, the worse your society becomes. And I think like if you just read about the Soviet Union, how low trust of a society that was, and how, in almost every industry, people were just cutting corners and being deceptive and not fulfilling like their obligations, all because it was just like a low trust society. You couldn't even trust your own children to not rat you out to the state, right? So in a very low trust society, your economy is going to suffer. People are going to be poorer. They're going to be more violent. Do you think that like when we outsource, let's call it outsourcing charity to like a sort of disembodied state apparatus, do you think that like damages like the social fabric and the trust, this sort of trust commodity? Let's call it like a Bitcoin, like trust coin. There's not enough trust coin to go around. And so people are, it seems to me that there's going to be, the more we do this, that there's going to be more and more social disunity, conflicts, and perhaps even violence, God forbid.
Yeah. So if it was a test and it was true or false, it would be true. I would say true. But to give you a little more, so I look at the concept of social trust as having faith in people.
Okay.
Do I have faith in my neighbors? Do I have faith in my community? And there is no question that the more that altruism, if you want to call it that, is outsourced to the government, and that people come to expect it from the government, that social trust will go down. And it's also, it's a matter of there's apathy that sets in. So there's the expectation that there must be a government program for that, or, well, it's not really my problem. I'm sure if you were the only one like that, we would hear about it. So there's got to be some, like, it's there's a crowding effect that happens. So the government walks into the, market of altruism and has a big footprint in it. Naturally, people adjust their behaviors, right?
Yeah.
It's human nature that, we see there's, I always think, right? Like that, and I tried to cover that in the article a little bit, because it's like, I write, but I have my own worldview and I have my own convictions, and it's kind of always sifted through that Christian lens. So if I take that off for a moment, what is my incentive to be charitable? What's my incentive to be charitable if the government's got this, right? So if I'm not being charitable, then if I'm not helping my neighbor, if I'm not why would they in turn expect me? If I'm not demonstrating that and leading in that, why would anybody expect that from me? Right? So to me, yes, a welfare state, it definitely erodes social trust, because apathy sets in. I mean, we already fight because, and not to get up on the soapbox here, but I really think part of, human depravity is that selfishness, that, at times we're greedy. We just want comforts. We just want what we want. And so if the welfare state wasn't as robust, people would have to take a much harder look at the state of their neighbor, their community, right? And there would be incentives. And I can actually divorce myself from my faith, because really the incentive for me is also that call to, man, here's another human made in God's image suffering. I seem to have an abundance and they're lacking. Like, I want to help. I can divorce myself from that and say, I'm in my community. People are struggling. They're not getting help. All of a sudden, things are going missing in my community.
Right.
Like I'm seeing, I'm seeing things degrade. Right. That's incentive right there to, aside from state assistance, go, how can I make a difference? What can I do to make people around me feel like it's okay? We're not going to let you completely fail or starve. So it again, I try and there's that, you can put on the glasses of, nothing the government does, is good. And, well, I understand that it's all through a form of theft, but it does help people. Like, I've got a family member that lives on social assistance, and I won't go into why, but has issues.
Right.
I mean, I know that it makes a difference for them, right? It helps them. And this person is not an example of, that, like, well, now they're disincentivized to go and get a job because they've been giving just enough to live comfortably. So why work and have what they're given clawed back? Because that's a whole other issue, right? Is that, oh, well, if I get this much from the government, but then I start working, I'm going to lose. So what's the point? Like, there's that whole balancing act, which is a fallout from, government welfare. But so it's not so cut and dry, but the reality is it's not building better communities. It's saving people, it's throwing people a lifeline, but it is divorced from relationship, faith in your common man, community building. It's devoid of all of that. It's very impersonal. And really there's an issue of trust there, because you feel like it's been like this for so long that the government would never cut the cord. And the government probably wouldn't, because they don't want the political fallout or the chaos, right?
Yeah.
But really, you're not relying on a person in your life.
Yeah.
You're relying on, digits that get direct deposited into your account every month and are contingent on you meeting the requirements to receive the entitlement, which is a whole other issue, right? So it's not, again, to get back to one of your first points, like, it's not when government does it, I don't see it as compassion.
Right.
It's very strategic, right? And the government has incentives to keep it going, for sure, that have nothing to do with compassion.
Hey everybody, just interrupting the conversation for one quick minute to remind you to follow the show on social media. Just search the Peaceful Way Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Reach out, send a message. I love hearing from people. Also, if you haven't already, make sure to give the show a 5-star rating and review on iTunes, or share it with someone you know who might like it. If you would like to support the show financially, you can contribute to my Patreon at www.patreon.com/thepeacefulway, or donate in crypto. All my crypto addresses are in the description of the show. All right, let's get back into the conversation.
Yeah, when we're talking about charity, we're talking about like a very human, visceral thing, like human to human interactions. When you're talking about the government, you're talking about a faceless bureaucracy, which I don't think it's possible that a faceless bureaucracy could possibly be compassionate or charitable. All they do is redistribute resources based on whatever is politically expedient at the time, right? And again, that doesn't mean that people aren't helped through the welfare state, or people don't benefit from the welfare state.
That's right.
We're both Canadians. We, to an extent, we have to accept an extent of the welfare state because we have universal health care. So we have free healthcare, and that's basically all that's available. So whether we like it or not, we have to participate in the welfare state as well. But there is this thing where it's like you can't really have. I don't see how definitionally you can have like compassion or charity when it's not actually human to human in any way. It's just basically people filling out forms and doing means testing and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of my thing with it. And if you really wanted to engage in charity, like real charity, it's like actually go and have a face-to-face interaction with somebody. And even if it I try and make it a practice to like, if someone asks me for money, I won't give them money, but I'll offer to like go buy them food, and I'll walk with them and hang out with them and learn a little bit about them, and that kind of stuff. And I feel like, that might be more beneficial, but it's also like we have better information as individuals on the ground than, again, this faceless bureaucracy does, because they're just sort of the centralized organization that can't actually address the individual needs of every person that's trying to access their services, right? It's always a one size fits all thing. Whereas when you're actually being charitable, again, individual human interactions, it can actually help meet the needs of the individuals you're being charitable to better, I think. But
and I mean, scaling that back, it would be an extremely long road. Like I don't think you or I would ever say like, oh, this is easily fixable. Like, I mean, I think, well, I mean, under COVID, for the last, like, trying to track what the federal government has been spending or where the money's going, like, forget that over the last year, right? But I was able to, find some pretty concrete numbers for like 2016, 2017. And like 30% of, I think it was 30% of total government expenditure. So 30% of like just over 300 billion went to what they call like personal transfers, right?
Oh,
so
okay.
Old age security, EI, childcare benefit. So there's no denying that you can't pull the plug on that overnight, or you will literally, like, it will just be chaos, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, clearly we've built a society.
There'll be riots in the streets.
Yeah. Like, you've built a society up in a way that you'd have to slowly over time.
Yeah.
And like this is, it's been interesting, this, kind of growing or inquiring into what does personal responsibility mean, and trying to change habits, or like we as a family, I mean, you must as well, like I received the childcare benefit.
Yeah, we get it.
And I have a monthly budget because we're single income. And so I track where everything goes, right? We own a home. I want to be responsible. I require the childcare benefit in the sense that I require that income, right, to be in the black and not in the red. However, I discipline I discipline my mind and my thoughts to understand and recognize that I'm not entitled to it. And
Right.
People who don't have kids, it is not just for them to be taxed to pay for my kids. That's not just. Just like it's not just that I pay property taxes and a portion of that goes to public school when we don't access public schools,
Right.
because we homeschool. So the thing is what I do is I train even though I am benefiting from the system that I kind of speak out against, we plan, right? I say, let's say this gets pulled overnight. I actually think I could live with that, and my wife would work a couple nights a week somewhere to make up the difference, right? It's just
Right.
kind of that future thinking of planning for a more just world, like, kind of thing. So anyways, probably off topic, but it just made me think, like, I know I benefit from other people being taxed, like through forced taxation. Clearly I benefit from that. I receive.
Yeah.
But I would be willing to make adjustments. And even, oftentimes we capitalists or free market proponents, we talk about, you mentioned it earlier, it's not a fixed pie, right? Like Hazlitt wrote about, it's maybe there's more pies, right? Like it's not, when I receive necessarily, it means somebody else is going without. So it's, I lost my train of thought there, but I don't know where I was going with that. But anyways,
I think that, like, I think there's that tension with me too. And like I said, I've kind of worked in the social services industry, and even I've worked for mostly private organizations. However, like, almost all of their funding comes from the government, right? It's not like, it's like, are they really private? I don't know. But I don't know that you can really call them private, but the majority of their funding does come from the government. And my wife works as a nurse, so she obviously is funded by the government as well. And I'm with you there. It's not like, I would love to just completely decouple myself from this whole system, which I believe is coercive and violent in nature and requires a threat of force constantly in order to be institutionalized. So it's not based on voluntary interactions or consent. It's based on the threat of violence. Now, unfortunately, that's sort of the system we're born in. And I think people all over the world, to some extent or another, there's not a whole lot you can do. But like you said, it's more about setting yourself up to be independent of that system in order to not need it anymore. And I totally agree with you there. Like that's a lot of what I'm even doing now. It's just generating multiple streams of income, building like my own personal infrastructure in terms of owning my house outright, or having all the supply, like having backup supplies and all that kind of stuff. There's just all sorts of like little things that you can do to make you less and less dependent on that system. I even tell people, like, get multiple passports if you can, like make it so that you can be more flexible. So if your society collapses, God forbid, you have an exit strategy. But
just because it came back to me. So where I was going with it's not a fixed pie is I am not one to say that I'm never going to say that we don't have like we can increase wealth over time through private industry without obviously central planning and the government coming up with projects or a big welfare state. Like, but the thing is I wrote about this in another article called Libertarianism is About Letting Go. I think I talked about it. And it's that I am actually prepared in the short term to actually have my standard of living scaled back a bit for the rolling back, because what the government gives me, there's strings attached. It's look how we're helping you. Look how we're propping you up. So you better just toe the line with the rest of it and try and like, so we'll give you this, but you're not allowed to speak like this, or you're not allowed to gather like this, or right. Like there's all these conditions.
Yeah.
So you know what? I don't want your money.
Yeah.
I don't want your money. I'll figure it out. And if I can't even bring my income stream back to what it was before you were helping me, you know what? The peace of mind that I'll have, as long as I'm not starving and like there's peace, the peace of mind that comes with being free from some of that oppression and that constantly evolving oppression, right? We're living in times where it's like, what? Like, what is next? That, I don't think, for most people that are just going along with it and don't question anything and are, no judgment, whatever. But if all you're doing is watching, like, I don't even know what people do anymore, to be honest. Like, I don't really know. I don't know if they watch 4 hours of TV every night when they get home, or I have no clue what the general population does anymore. I just know what we do.
Yeah.
But like, unless you're like that and you're really not concerned and you actually really believe that the government is inherently good and has your back, like the psychological cost or impact of what is starting to happen, to me, to not have that is worth financially having less. Literally.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Like totally. Like,
yeah, I totally agree. And
but I know for many it's not the case. They just want the Benjamins and they don't care. It's like, oh, that's a small price to pay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's sort of, and we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. But I think that's kind of the exact thing to do. But it also, you know what? It also makes you have to lean more on your actual community of people that you have around you. You can't just go to the faceless bureaucracy and get them to give you something. It's like, okay, if those things aren't available, I actually have to build relationships with people. I have to network with people. I have to rely on my community to help me if I'm falling on hard times or something, and you actually like have to build relationships. And then, but doing that has all sorts of great, social benefits, and not the least of which is the whole social psychology concept of reciprocity, which is like a whole nother thing I don't want to get into, but I would encourage people to read a little bit about that. But reciprocity is like really important for having social cohesion, but there's no reciprocity when there's no like actual charity going on. No. It's like we're not forced to actually have to build these relationships with people. So
no, like when people in I don't really know. I'm thinking back to classic examples, right? Like, but when you got neighbors, first sign of trouble, calling the cops for a noise violation for the backyard neighbor or the like.
Well, not like, only
just that, like that's like society is ill if it's gotten to that point, right?
It's not only that, you have your neighbor like calling the cops if you have someone over for a barbecue these days.
Yeah.
It's I don't know what it's like out east, but here in Alberta, it's like you're not allowed to have gatherings, and you could get a ticket if you do, right? And so the state is not only is it outsourcing all the charity and the social benefits that come with voluntary charity, it is also encouraging people to be less charitable by like rat on your neighbor for not abiding by some sort of arbitrary health restriction, right? And so like
what's the
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, because you're out in Alberta, what's the name of the pastor that just got out of jail?
Oh yeah, James Coates. Yeah.
Okay, so here's a perfect example, right? Like, you want to talk about charity? You can't tell me the government. Okay, so they kept him for like, was it like 2 months or 6 weeks?
Yeah, it was a few weeks for sure.
That is, you're looking at an entity that is so bent on, we cannot give an inch because we have to withhold power, remain legitimate, show, like you're talking about a pastor that was, trying to extend charity to people in his life that rely on him in difficult times. I don't even know how they released him. I don't think it's that like the proceedings are done, but like how uncharitable to hold him for almost 2 months in jail, knowing why he was there.
Yeah.
Like, and you know why they held him so long? I bet it's because he stayed on the Hill and said, I'm not signing your attestation letters saying I won't do it again. I'm not. So he was up front, and they're also, just like,
sorry. Also, just another side to that is not only would he have to commit to that, to not doing it again, but there's also like non-disclosure agreements where you're not even allowed to talk about it on social media or go to the press about it. Otherwise they won't let you post bail, so there's all these, that's what happened with that guy in Ontario, Adam Skelly, who had the barbecue joint. So he ended up kind of, I don't want to say caving. I think what he did was pretty courageous, but he ended up signing like these kind of non-disclosure agreements, like saying that he wasn't allowed to do any media appearances or anything like that. So they're basically like, it's like a muzzle order, right? Yeah. So we'll let you off, but you can't speak out against our authority, right? Like you can't criticize us in public, and it's like, I don't know, that seems to be like and it's judges that are putting these orders on people. And it seems to be like, well, you're a petty little tyrant, aren't you? But it's, I don't know. I don't know. It just seems like what a crazy society to live in to even think that that's okay. I also wanted to bring up, like, here in Alberta, there's kind of been like mixed feelings, especially among Christians, with that James Coates
right, of
case.
Course, for sure.
Yeah, and a lot of people feel, well, like he could have just done more services. He didn't have to have like full services, like the government gave him lots of chances to comply, and he's just doing it to what do you say, like get attention, like
Right.
they there's a lot of like well, Christians shouldn't be doing that, and then obviously Romans 13 is always quoted, and I just like it, I feel like that's sort of irrelevant. Like maybe he did have like sort of ulterior motives. Maybe he did like the spotlight about it. Like his church, after he started doing this, his church like started booming. So like people from all around started going to the church, right? In sort of it was sort of a protest, right? Like it's a protest of going to church, protesting. And I'm kind of like it's not just about the, like, it seems that people don't understand. It's not just about, going along to getting along. He's trying to make a point. He's trying to say, you know what, like the government has overstepped their bounds. And to be fair to him too, from what I've read, is that he followed the restrictions up until about November, when they kind of did a second wave of lockdowns. And that's when he was like, all right, we're not doing this anymore, and he was kind of like, and I think a lot of people were at that stage in the beginning. And I think like, I'm like, if people don't start putting up some pushback against this, then you're basically giving the government a sort of a blank check to just go as far as they want for as long as they want, without any repercussions. And I'm like, you may question his individual motives, but you have to think about sort of the bigger picture about something like this. But like, what's your view on that? Like, as a Christian, do you think we should just sort of just go along to get along, obey, not put up too much of a fuss, and just put our head down? And even if it is wrong, they're not necessarily asking us to sin. They're not necessarily asking us to do anything that's necessarily immoral. They're just asking us not to have a large gathering. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, so just before I talk to that, one word that, or one term that came up when you were talking about, the government gets a blank check. It's anytime I see them have to expend political capital throughout this, I'm happy.
Yeah,
because if
that's
that's
exactly how I feel. I'm like,
yeah, like make them work for this. What they're
right.
doing, and my tune might be completely different if data was showing that this is just the greatest killer since I don't know what. But let's, like, we're all, the ones of us that are looking for data and looking at trends and taking a step back, we're all, I'm not of the temperament to sit there and laugh and think it's comical. I'm just confused, right? I'm like, okay, so anytime the government is forced to, be put through the ringer a little bit, because the optics of that are bad, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The optics of jailing the peaceful pastor are bad.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that was uncomfortable for them. Me personally, it's funny because we were experiencing something a few months back in the fall, and it prompted me to write a piece on the fractioning church. I think it was Witness to a Fractioning Church or something, but it was one of those, how you're just going about your life and then something just becomes real urgent and pressing, and you're like, well, there you go. That's the next thing that clearly. We're over at some dear friend's house, and initially through all this, I was it's tough to answer this because it's compartmentalized a little bit. This is another perfect example of, as a citizen, what are my thoughts? And then as a Christian in fellowship with other Christians and under the authority of Christ, how do I deal with my private citizen views, right? And that's the tension that Christians live with, is I'm no different than the unbeliever. The only difference is I have to make my thoughts and my actions try and be somehow captive, right? Make them captive to Christ. And so here's what I'm getting at is, as a citizen, I think this is a gross abuse of power, stomping on individual rights, no data to back it, total misappropriation of powers and initiatives, and just, I don't get it, right? And I don't support it. I support individuals struggling, individuals fearful who have bought into it and are just, I support them as individuals. I will not throw them under the bus. I will do what I can to care for them. When I interact with them or in their presence, I will do that. When it comes to the church, I think what's important is the specific body in question, right? The specific church. What's the group conscience? So to me, if Pastor Coates's denomination were feeling extreme conviction that we want to continue fellowshipping and worshiping, and we support you, Pastor, then I support that. If there's a church body where there's some elderly that have bought into it, or people are immunocompromised and scared, and then you've got elements of that church family that, as you know, their individual beliefs are, well, this is malarkey, and this is, my conviction is that we shouldn't have. Personally, as I reflect on scripture and I reflect on the concept of unity, I think that plays out differently. And I think that something like masks, and so now grant you, I'm talking different scenario, right? Like, I'm not talking you're not allowed to meet, your church is closed. I'm talking a scenario like you got to wear masks and do some social distancing. If there's people in the congregation that really feel like there should be an effort made, and they're uncomfortable if there isn't one, and there's a camp that is like, we shouldn't do that, like this is, God's house or whatever, right? Big characters kind of get carried away.
Yeah.
To me, when I review scripture and I seek after God's heart, I think as a unified church, then the camp of, I don't want to wear a mask or socially distance, are they really being asked to do a lot to support their brothers and sisters who are struggling? So if that kind of unpacks for you my view, it's really a desire for unity, and I've said this for a long time. Everybody's different. For me, masks, I was never a die on the hill, won't wear a mask guy. Yeah. I was really waiting for the vaccination stuff. Yeah. I was like, if they tell you need to take that, that's my hill. Yeah. Right. For my own reasons. But I determined that early on. I said, the mask comes on, comes off. Now I have the luxury of not working at a as a cashier, wearing it 8 hours a day. Like, my heart goes out to those people. That's really rough. Or healthcare workers. Yeah. So, but anyways, not to be too long-winded. That's my response. Is it's not black and white. I'm not going to tell a Christian, as a Christian, you fall into the authority of Christ, so don't listen to the government. And I'm not going to turn around and say, well, the government isn't asking very much, so you should obey. I'm not. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel very much the same way, and I've always said, like, people, I've been pretty open about my what do you call it? Open resistance to the government lockdowns, I would say. And it's it's even caused tension with, friends and family that I know, because I'm very much in the camp, like, every single restriction should be removed. Individuals, and it's not to say that this virus is not a threat. It's just to say that individuals need to make their own choices for their own health needs. And, society as a whole doesn't get to put their boots on our necks because our healthcare system is terrible, right? And can't handle, which is actually not as bad, and it's been more than handling the pandemic more than efficiently. So neither here nor there. But yeah, I feel like very similar. If I like know somebody who's like very nervous about it, I won't like try and get into a debate with them unless it like comes up in discussion. But if they like really were like, you have to wear a mask around me, I'd be fine, whatever. I'll wear a mask around you. It's not that big of a deal. And it's all, yeah, it depends on your conduct. I know like at our church, they sort of like, they have all the signs saying like it's the law to wear a mask and stuff, but they don't enforce it. And I think their sort of attitude is like, well, that's the government's job to enforce it. So if they want to send peace officers here to ticket people, that they're free to do that, but we're not gonna, like, we have they kind of feel like they've done their due diligence. And then so like at church, our church culture seems to be pretty okay with it. I'm sure there's people within the church who are like, no, we need to be abiding by every single restriction. But I don't wear a mask at church for the most part. There's some places I do, there's some places I don't. It kind of all depends, right? But there's an extent where it's like, I agree with you. There's just hills that aren't worth dying on, but there are hills that are worth dying on. And I think with James Coates, he decided, well, this is the hill I'm going to die on, and but I think it also takes a good amount of courage. And it also is like, this is the question I pose to everyone, about the restrictions is like, okay, maybe you think that all these restrictions are justified. But ask yourself, where is the line for you personally? What's the line that shouldn't be crossed? At what point is it no longer justifiable? And I don't think a lot of people have actually asked themselves that question. It's sort of like, well, there's nothing the government can't do. That's sort of the attitude. But I think if you just even ask that question, it might just get the wheels turning with people, to maybe question a little more about everything that's going on. But it also, going back to our original topic, it's also like, yeah, people have very strong feelings one way or another about lockdowns and restrictions. And you kind of have to be charitable with people. Like I was saying earlier, you have to like sort of, as long as no one's asking you to do something that violates your own conscience, then wherever you can, make room and make space for people to accommodate them if you can, and where you can't, like, let them know, like, say that's a boundary I'm not going to cross, or we just have to part ways for now. But I think that's like, I don't know, that does seem to be an important aspect to like the attitude of charity, is just everyone's trying to figure this out and no one really has the correct information or sufficient information to actually know the best way to respond to this virus, right?
Yeah, like just being gracious, right? Like just okay, like you're already coming off really strong. I can tell your position. I could take offense, but I understand that, like, I get it, right? Because you're not alone. They've rolled out this whole, like, so yeah, it's like tied into empathy and just like, it's not just getting, that really in a nutshell, like, for it to be charitable, you kind of have to get out of yourself, right? You have to, I mean, years ago, this is before the seed there. I battled like drug and alcohol addiction, like before being saved. And so that you're aware of the 12-step program, obviously, right? Just through whatever contact with clients or like the beauty about that program is that like once you stop doing whatever it is, whatever your vice is, the reason that that it's so effective for so many people that were so downtrodden and like hopeless is that it's a continuous, right? So you sober up, you heal, you experience victory, you experience new life, and then for people that continue, right? Like I'm not actively in any 12-step programs or anything, but I use them to get sober and I understand them. By you continuing to work with the struggling alcoholic or addict who's 1, 2, 5 days sober, even though you're 4 or 5 years sober, right? You're being charitable by giving of your time and investing in somebody who's hurting. And you're both benefiting, right? Because not only are you helping them through mentorship and fellowship, you're remembering where you've come from and it's helping you stay sober and stay on track, right? So it's a perfect example, just, in a little microcosm of sobriety, how charity works, right? It benefits both parties to a certain degree.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And it's also just helps with like just living a meaningful and purposeful life, which I think there's a lot of nihilism in the world today. And I think that's I think that's going to be a hard issue for us as a society to deal with, especially over the next couple of years. I think seeing the statistics of opioid abuse this year, and they haven't got the suicide statistics, but everything I'm hearing is it's going to be up quite a bit this year, and especially the suicide attempts. I've heard that that's already been skyrocketing. Maybe not necessarily the successful ones, but the unsuccessful ones. So, it's like it gives your life like a little bit of meaning. Like if you feel like you're aimless, like just find somebody to help. Find somebody to like it can just be like it can be an old lady across the street. I don't know, just like just do, even if you don't feel like doing it, just force yourself to do it. And just get yourself outside of yourself a little bit, and do something charitable. I think it can like really break you out of a malaise in some pretty meaningful ways. So
because if you've got people that are not necessarily counting on you but appreciate how you impact their life, right? Let's say you go to a really dark place and you're like, what's the difference? Nobody's going to miss me. Guess what? If you're involved in somebody's life, even to such a minor detail, that can be recalled, right? And you're
Absolutely.
Like, oh, well, that person might miss me, like just all these things, right? Like, so. Yeah.
Well, and I even wanted to say too, like charity isn't just for those who have resources. It's for those who have little to no resources as well. If you're on like the lower class of society, like you can still be charitable and it can be beneficial to you. Like you talk about in the article, there's benefits to being charitable. You don't have to just be charitable with resources. You have time and you have relational connection that you can give to people, right? And you can make the world like just that slightly of a better place just by engaging with other people in a charitable way. But and
you can return, you can repay evil with good. And that's something that's not built into any social class. That's just an interaction with an individual, and they mistreat you. And the world is eye for an eye, evil for evil. If you choose to repay good for evil, that is being charitable. That's an aspect of charity.
Yeah. And like we were talking about with justice, like what do you do when a injustice has been committed against you? You know, do you try and get vengeance, or do you try to give charity? You know, that can be a very difficult thing, but it can be
It
a
is. Oh
very
yeah, it is.
liberating thing too.
Yeah, no, it is. And none of this comes easy, right? Like it's,
Yeah.
you know, some of these things that we're talking about are kind of like, you know, people might, you know, associate them with like spiritual principles, or, you know, the bar is set pretty high. It is set high. None of this stuff comes easy. But I
Yeah.
think what we're discussing is the benefits that come from it when we're able to nail it down, right? Like when we're actually able to, and sometimes it's through God's, you know, God's help. It's, being a Christian, I believe in that. It's, okay, that was supernaturally, so something helped me there, because I shouldn't have reacted that way. I should have got really upset, and instead I was gracious, right? Like it's, but sometimes it's deliberate actions, right? It's so
Yeah,
yeah.
totally. Yeah, I think that's just it. And I think you know, to have like a more peaceful society, it comes through human action, right? Like just individual actors behaving in a certain way, and that's like just starts with us, and in a very like simple and basic level. But anyways,
Yeah.
Ollie, I just wanted to say thanks for coming on the show. Did you want to plug any of your stuff? Like, give us your social media where people can find you.
Yeah, I'm primarily on Twitter. So my handle is at Mr. Oliver Adamson on Twitter. And really the only other, well, I'm on MeWe, but it's quite limited, so I wouldn't bother. I'm just on a social group there. But the only other place you can find me is on Instagram at ollie.adamson. But all I do on Instagram is post a historical record of my weekly tokens, which I didn't bring it up earlier, but through the Liberty Quill, I post a weekly token every Sunday. And it's basically just an image with a caption. It's not really a meme, it's more of a way of expressing an idea. And I don't know that. I don't know that people necessarily always grasp what my idea is, but there is a meaning behind it. It's a combination of symbolism with a few words, and it's supposed to tokenize a greater idea. But anyways, I guess my point is over on Instagram at ollie.adamson, there's just kind of a historical posting of all those tokens, because they get removed weekly and replaced on the website.
It's like it's like a non-fungible token. You should sell it for like $5 million.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, while I can, right?
Yeah.
Before, but and then of course, libertyquill.com. Again, you can find my articles there, but you can also find other articles like you, Jordan. You have a couple up there. I've got other people that periodically ask if I'm willing to post their stuff. If you're Canadian and you happen to go to libertyquill.ca by accident, don't worry, it'll redirect to libertyquill.com, so you'll find your way anyways. But that's about it. Yeah, just it's more of an outlet for me. But if more people can, if it allows other people to be an outlet, then I think it's mission accomplished. So that's what I'm hoping for anyways. And I would like to say, Jordan, I really appreciate your podcast. I tune in every time. There's something about it that I find, it's going to be kind of corny given what you're after, but I find the podcast peaceful, if that makes any sense. It relaxes me. And, and I've really appreciated it. So yeah.
All right. Awesome. Well, thanks for that. And we'll see y'all later. Peace.